Hi, everybody. Welcome to our next episode of Future Focus CXOs. I have a very exciting guest today, Walt Carter. He is a Chief Digital Officer for Homestar Financial Corporation. And without further delay, let me welcome Walt to the call.
Hey,
Hello,
good morning,
Walt.
Jay. Good to be with you this morning.
Do you mind introducing yourself and also tell us the 40 plus years exciting journey you have?
The journey started for me a long time ago now. It feels like in another galaxy far away. But when I was in college, I majored in physics, and I had a great department chair in the physics department that really encouraged all of us in the department to start writing our own computer programs. And the idea was you're going to do a lot of work in the lab. You're going to do a lot of statistical analysis. You need to let the computers figure out how to do that statistical analysis for you to make your time more efficient. So I started writing programs back in the early 80s, frankly. And then a few years later, built for my thesis a computer simulation of a nuclear particle accelerator, and got to go spend some time with PhD candidates in physics at Triangle University's nuclear labs, look at their empirical results from real accelerator experiments, and then derive the algorithms, the math, to describe what happens at a subatomic level. We call it Brownian motion in physics, with a known particle or a known foil at the end. And at these accelerations through the tunnel of this length, this is the kind of interaction that you would expect. I had a lot of fun building that way back on a VAX. If anybody's interested in the platform, it was a VAX, and the language was BASIC Plus.
Wow. Okay.
And for years, that math held up really well. It's been replatformed several times, but the algorithms that were the underpinning of the code was really solid. And then I took some time, went into the U.S. Air Force and served as a missile maintenance officer on real rockets, ICBMs up in North Dakota. And so I jokingly tell everybody I'm a card-carrying rocket scientist that's actually worked on real rockets. Along the way, I got a master's in administration, and I now have an honorary doctorate in digitalization and infrastructure leadership. And I've had a really interesting career after the military, went back into IT, pure IT, if you will. I had a lot of really interesting roles on my way up to CIO a few years ago, and ran a huge development group for a number of years where I had developers in China and India and outside of London, up in Vancouver, British Columbia, and my core team in Atlanta. And this was before collaboration tools. So you were doing all this through email and phones.
Wow.
And then I've been a CIO and a chief marketing officer at 3 different mortgage companies now. And today my title is Chief Digital Officer and CIO at Homestar Financial. And I've been at Homestar above average for CIO. I'm now closing in on year 6.
Wow. Okay.
So the average tenure for a CIO, I'm told, is about 3.5 to 4 years. It's getting longer, which is good, but the average CIO is not going to be in that role for very long. And we can talk a little bit about some speculation on why that's true. But my journey's been an interesting one. I've built applications. I've had a really good career, been recognized by my peers a few times for leading innovation. And I've done, I think, 17 packaged software implementations now for giant global organizations as well as relatively small ones. And I've learned a lot in the process. And a couple of years ago, I put a book out on what my learnings were. I will tell everybody it's not a nighttime reading for your children. It's really more of a horror story. I learned the hard way about how to get organizations of people to actually change and adopt new practices and new tools.
Yes, and I'm going to get into that. I will definitely advise all our viewers to take a look at it and definitely read it. When we last spoke, you said that we learn more from failures than success. And I have a question to you. You said that an average life of a CIO in a company is for 3 to 4 years, right? What are those signs or those things that happen or you sense based on which you believe that you need to look for a change?
So I think what happens, Jay, is that for me, very directly, I would tell you, I've been hired 3 times essentially to do digital transformation at 3 different companies. And so now I can safely say I have completed 3 digital transformations at 3 different companies. successfully. And yet, I also recognize that for many of us, when we get that offer that comes in and says, we need you to lead this transformation, they have told me at all three companies, hey, everything is pretty solid. We're ready to scale and go to a new level. You get in, and within the first 90 to 100 days, you find out, oh, no, that's not really
They're
true.
far away from being there. Yeah.
I've got a lot of work to do. I've got a lot of technology debt here that nobody's been paying attention to. And truthfully, the executives that hire the CIOs don't really know that part of the world anyway. So they don't know it's there necessarily, unless somebody has really made a great point of calling it out. So then you go back to the executive team and your board and you say, hey, look, I'm going to need a little more time before we start on the digital transformation. I've got to reset the foundation.
Oh, yeah.
Foundational work is not as straight and easy as a lot of people seem to say in the books and the theories. And in real life, it's not a Gordian knot. When you get into that technology debt, what you find out is it's a lot of expedience in the history of the company. We needed to be able to move fast and do things to get to market quickly. So we hardwired everything together, Walt. We took it all and we said, we'll come back later and fix it, right? We'll set up a data hub or a services hub or something that's a little more elegant. But for right now, we just need to get it all connected, right? You come in and you're trying to figure out how to rationalize and simplify this environment. And the next thing you know is you can't cut it. You can't just take the giant sword like Alexander the Great did and walk away and go, yeah, I fixed it for you. You have to very carefully figure out what that input, output, throughput mechanisms are in order to make those changes. And so consequently, rebuilding the foundation at most companies of any size really takes about 3 years. And about time you get done rebuilding the foundation and you're really ready to do the transformation is about the time that the board comes to you and says, hey, Walt, we've got a new guy coming in that's actually going to do the transformation that we hired you to do 3 years ago. And I could be mistaken about that. Right now, it's a great time to be a CIO because you're seeing almost the opposite of that. You're seeing the fear of missing out from all of the new AI and the large language model stuff that's going out there. Board members are actually calling CIOs going, hey, what are we doing? What are we doing with large language?
Exactly.
What are we doing with ChatGPT? Shouldn't we be doing something, right? A smart CIO is going, we would love to do something, but we're going to need some budget. We're going to need some money for that. If you want to go off budget and give us some R&D money, we would love to tell you what we can do with these kinds of tools because they're very exciting.
Yeah. And so in a summary, what you're saying is leading a digital transformation. Board starts with a lot of excitement saying that, oh, we need to have a digital transformation. They hire a new leader, but then the new leader realizes that the organization is no way close to starting a digital transformation project. And there is so much of plumbing cleanup before a digital transformation can start. And the patience is something that runs out with the board. And they feel, oh, we hired this guy 3 years back. He's still not able to do it.
I think there's a couple of other big factors too that are worth talking about because the truth is, it's not just the technology. Is the organization's culture really ready?
Correct.
You can go into some organizations where they literally have done a great job of creating a change-ready organization, right? Where people are learning all the time, advancing skills all the time. They have a scientific bent toward experimentation and learning. And then you go into many organizations that are exact opposite of that, right? Where the culture is really entrenched in the way we've always done it, and they're very comfortable there. They don't want to learn. They don't really welcome that kind of opportunity. And because they're just so entrenched in the normal, right? Having worked in a variety of industries, I would just broadly categorize that some of the guys in manufacturing, for instance, are more likely to be the hardwired, resistant to change. The companies that grew up as a software company are much more advanced in terms of the culture being more ready to experiment quickly. And just worth thinking about. Making changes in a manufacturing process is very expensive. Making changes to a software development process is not so expensive. There's a reason that change is protected. We don't want to spend the money in manufacturing if we don't have to. Software, we can experiment very quickly and we'll just cut it onto a CD and then off we go. So I think there's some entrenched factors. The other thing that's interesting is how aligned are the executives about the change? And I've spent a lot of time over the last few years, and even in my new book that I'm working on right now, I spend a lot of time thinking through alignment of executive and what I call tuning. And so it's one thing to get them all to agree that this is what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we're going to do it, and how we're going to know we're done. How do we know when the value is there?
Yeah.
But then I think secondarily to that is reminding them continuously, this is the tuning exercise. And if you've ever played in a band, the first thing you do when you get all the band members together with their instruments is you tune. You get everybody tuned so they're all on the same frequency. It's all vibrating good. And there's no discordance, no bad noises coming out of these instruments. And then you work on the performance. Let's start to make it our own, put our own spin on it.
Correct.
And then periodically, as you go through that learning of the music and working on the performance, you retune every instrument periodically, because as you use the instruments, what happens? They get out of tune.
Oh, yeah.
And so, again, tuning in a band is important. I think tuning in an executive team, it's critically important, because you will not get tuning for the organization unless the executives are aligned.
That is such a nice analogy. I'm going to steal it from you. And you said it very beautifully. We do a lot of digital transformations, and you're absolutely right. Money is just one side of the story, but you need organizational readiness. You need executive lineup and tuning. And this is the best way to explain the executives that why we need to do what I'm asking you to do. Such a nice insight. Now, we did speak last time also about that the standard processes, this PMBOK, project management book and things, those go a limited way when you talk about digital transformation. I would love to explore more.
The PMBOK, the Project Management Book of Knowledge, turns out to be really valuable. I've got no negative energy toward the PMBOK. What I think I've discovered, though, is in transformation, it's not as simple as there's an existing best practice already available from the Project Management Institute. Let's go pull the checklist down and run that checklist against this situation in our organization. Transformation itself implies that we're moving to some new shape or structure that we've not been in before. It's not well understood at the beginning. Every organization is unique and different from the others, even when they do exactly the same things in the same niche or industry. What you find is, because of the uniqueness of the people that they've brought in, the way they approach solving problems, the way they approach getting work done, very different from organization to organization. So getting to standardization that would allow you to take advantage of best practices is really a challenge for most organizations. And then you start to introduce what I think of as some of the better models for thinking about transformation. Lippitt-Noster framework is one of the most powerful tools that I've used, that literally says, look, let's get the vision really well defined up front. Then let's move to consensus on the vision. That's the alignment step. Make sure that everybody's bought into that vision and that we're not going to have passive resistance or passive aggressive behaviors because they didn't like it. Right? Then you move to, do I have the right incentive plan for everybody that's involved? Do I have the right people? Do I have the right stuff? Do I have the right plan? Right? If I get all of those 6 boxes filled up correctly, and I maintain that tuning and the alignment across that whole effort, I win most of the time. So Lippitt-Noster, powerful framework for change management. The other thing that we found over time is that if any one of those is missing, you're going to be in for a world of hurt. If any two of them are missing and not accurately filled out, you might as well just stop. You're going to lose a lot of money and waste a lot of people's time. Don't do it.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, and my follow-up question is definitely about AI, because you did a little bit touch upon it. In your opinion, how AI is truly going to impact the financial industry and specific to mortgage?
I think AI, as we understand it today, let me go back and tell you that I've been part of a group here in Atlanta called the Applied AI Society of Atlanta for probably about 7 years. Early on, we were bringing in practitioners. We're doing really cool experiments and projects in AI. It turns out most of them weren't really AI, they were ML. And the distinction I have always made there is, if you've got distributed agency with the ability to evaluate information, make an analysis, and then take an action at the point of the analysis, just like a human does, right? Then that's artificial intelligence. anything that is gathering data from multiple stores, bringing it back into a big central processing unit, and then pushing those results back out, that's more like machine learning.
Correct.
And the key is agency. You've got to have the ability to make a decision and then do something at that point of presence. And so most of the stuff for the last few years has really been really advanced ML in some cases, but not so much AI. Even the large language models that we're looking at right now, from ChatGPT and Bard and Anthropic, there's a bunch of them out there, Jay, that I see more and more coming every day. They tell you, though, it's really more like what I did 40 years ago. You write algorithms, you create a set of decision trees that become a decision forest very quickly. And it's just a question of really how good is the data set that we're learning from. And good is a nebulous word, the eye of the beholder. But is it validated, cleansed data that has weight to it? You can look at a lot of different qualities of the data. The biggest frustrations that most of us are having is that we already know our data is not so good. And it's a big effort to cleanse that data and normalize it so that it could be very valuable. And so you start to see those kinds of challenges, because now I'm going to go back to my CFO saying, I'm going to need about 2 years worth of money to cleanse this data before we can actually make big money from the LLM that board asked me to turn on last week, right? Because if I just put my neural net in place and I start to exercise and train models, I'm going to get some pretty bad stuff out, right? Garbage in, garbage out.
So let me then say, which parts of mortgage and also the financial industry you feel will benefit from AI, and which part will benefit from ML?
So I actually think that when you combine AI with robotic process automation, you combine a workflow engine over the top of all of that, what you're going to see is that most of what we do in the mortgage industry can be automated and can be managed with a lot more precision. And there's a big part of the industry that's going to resist that, because, again, risk is in the eye of the beholder. There are two kinds of risk that we evaluate when we're doing a mortgage. One is what we call the borrower's ability to pay. That's a bucket of risk. Do you have the ability to actually pay this mortgage note every month, first, for some years? And then second is the actual property risk, the property value risk, to be more specific, which is this house worth what the appraiser said, and more importantly, worth what we're going to lend against the house. And so those two big buckets of risk, right, the borrower's ability to pay and the value of the home, are what we are trying to use our underwriting skill set to measure, right? And again, every individual is kind of unique and their situations are unique. So consequently, you see that the ability to automate this stuff goes right back to what we started out talking about on transformations, right? Do I have the ability to use standards or best practices? A few years ago at my first mortgage company, I had a Salesforce implementation, and I had built an automated underwriting system on an IBM platform. So I had access to Watson and Einstein, right? And I thought, oh, this will be cool. Let me get some of my data guys to go to work on using Einstein on the CRM side to evaluate and weight better the prospects, right? So I can do prospect weighting as they're coming through the CRM system using Einstein's AI capabilities, right? And then over on the actual underwriting side, on the underwriting system itself, I can use Watson to start to define parameters for each loan program type. Let's say, for instance, I'm working with VA loans, Veterans Administration loans, right? Then could I actually say, looking back over the 20 years of VA loans that we've done, here is what a set of parameters would look like for this type of home, this type of borrower. Oh, and then as the underwriter, the real underwriter, actually makes a decision, could we then provide some feedback to that underwriter that says, you're slightly above the band in your underwriting decision, which means that you're increasing our risk of audit. You're out of band from our normal decisions for a VA loan of this type, of this size. Could we ask you to rethink some of your decisions and bring us back into a lower audit risk profile? Or are you ratcheting up the requirements as an underwriter and really minimizing our risk from audit, but also minimizing our ability to actually close this loan for this borrower on this property? Are you taking us out of the market because you're overzealous, let's say, in your underwriting approach? right? Could we get back to a normal band either way and then increase our ability to do better quality loans over time with lower audit risk? Seemed like a really good idea. I could not get my underwriters to ever buy into using the automated underwriting system to help them. And I continue to see that across the AI and even the ML world, we've got our people, frankly, are scared that we're going to replace them all. And when you see the headlines that say 200,000 jobs eliminated because of AI, it doesn't help when you start to talk about an AI project at your company.
As a follow-up question, let me ask, what are your views on, will AI really replace our jobs or it will make us better human beings?
I'm actually one of those guys that thinks AI has a tremendous ability to be useful to us to remove friction and to improve the seamlessness, especially in an omni-channel world, right? Making sure that we have the ability to see all of the possible places and ways that people can interact with our companies and pulling that data together very quickly and providing it to your customer service point of contact, right? Whoever that is, whoever from your team is talking to that customer should be able to see all of the interactions that the customers had, and better still, have it be summarized for them so you can get a sense of where they're at as they enter into a new conversation. Is this a customer that's really fired up at me because they feel like I haven't done well with them from a customer service perspective? They're not satisfied with me. Or is this somebody that's super excited about their work with me so far, and I should be ready to ask them for a referral to somewhere else to get more business because they're really that good of a relationship? I should be able to see that from that body of knowledge that we have if we collect it correctly and summarize it correctly. I don't think we're there yet, Jay. From my own testing and playing with some of these tools that are available for the public, I would tell you that it's a crapshoot about whether you're going to get high quality or not. And again, you don't know very much as a consumer about the quality of the data sets that they use to train these tools with. And so far, what I've seen is like ChatGPT's gotten better as it's evolved, but it's still wrong a lot. And it's very quick to say, hey, I'm sorry, the limits of my data set, blah, blah, blah. And you can train it, but there's risk on that too, right? And most of us as CIOs are really wrestling with, okay, I need to do this on my own data sets, but I need to make sure I don't merge my data in with the big pool out there on the internet, right? And I don't want to release all my data. I want to try to protect myself for as long as I can. And that's going to be an interesting challenge as well, because you got a lot of well-meaning people in your organizations that want to play with these tools on their own, and they have credentials to all your systems.
Okay, thank you. I want to shift gears a little bit and want you to talk about your book. We can't stay here, becoming a change captain. So give us a synopsis of the book for the readers.
I'm coming at the world from a place where obviously I've done a lot of big change projects over my career. I'm technically in my 40th year right now of a career. And along the way, one thing that stands out is the old cliche that says, you literally cannot put your foot into the same body of moving water ever. If you take your foot out and put it back in right away, it's different water. If you come back to the same spot 20 years from now, it's wildly different water. Organizations are like that. And organizations of people are like that. There's a guy over in England named Dave Snowden that has a concept that he calls the Kenneth framework for sense making. It's a sense making tool set that I think is really profound and very well thought through. And Dave is into a new thinking about waterway evaluation, right? How does the current move through your organization? What is the flow of the current through your organization? If you think of it like water or like a fluid, can you start to understand better how change is going to go in your organization from that kind of culture mapping and that kind of sense making? And then he also had the original thought process of, yeah, if it's simple, there's probably a best practice for that. Let's go grab the best practice and apply it. But if it's complicated, oh, wait a second. But if it's really complex and there's no obvious pattern, I'm going to have to go do some different kind of sense making. And if it's chaos and there is no pattern at all that we can discern, then I'm just going to have to probe and then figure out how to respond. And so as you move through that framework as a change leader, is my transformation simple? Most of them aren't. It's a little more complicated because we're not quite as organizationally ready for the change, and we've got all this legacy debt. Wait, it's complex because we're actually going to be bringing in several other companies that we're merging and acquiring as we do this. So we got to do a lot more sense making here to figure out what our transformation is going to look like when we come together at the end, right? And then, we got a whole bunch of new companies that we decided to buy up all at once and put them all together. And that transformation is wildly different, right? There's no rhyme or reason here. They don't even seem to be connected to each other in terms of how they go to market, what they sell, how they sell it, right? It's wildly different, right? So in each one of those kinds of ways of thinking about what is the transformation, right? And then you add that other word, digital, in. The digital transformation. What's different about what we were doing in the analog world that now makes this a digital component of our transformation, which is going to lead us all the way back to data, normalization, standardization, cleansing of the data. And then finally, I think back to AI. I think we're still 10 years, maybe more, away from AI having meaningful impact on lots of organizations. Many organizations that are less receptive to change, they're going to be doing things pretty much like they are 10 years from now. I saw a guy yesterday, and I wish I could remember his name, but he basically said, in 5 years, all the development is going to be done by AI. We won't have developers. Okay. I think the best use case I've seen right now for the LLM stuff is the co-piloting and the aid to developers. It's also really good if you're a writer, by the way, for stopping writer's block, because you can do a prompt real quick and it'll give you all kinds of stuff to talk about. But I do believe that ultimately, this is a really great, powerful tool set, has a lot of potential to really make life better for a lot of people. And will there be jobs lost? Yeah, I think so. There were jobs lost when we moved from carburetors to fuel injection. There were jobs lost when we moved from horses to cars. And there will be job gains on the other side of this as well. There will be brand new jobs. One of the highest paying jobs that's suddenly emerged is a prompt engineer, somebody that can really write good prompts to start the work with the AI engine, right? And they're very high paying jobs for people that can do that well. So that's a brand new job. 2 years ago, there were no such thing as prompt engineers being hired by companies, right? We're already seeing this evolution, this shift happening. I'm excited. I wish I was 21 or 30, maybe 31.
Oh yeah, I agree. I think I do remember long back when in one of the interviews, Steve Jobs has said that I would just love to be a fly on the wall to see how technology is going to evolve in next 20 years.
Yeah, I would love to do that too.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I want to ask you, because in the last conversation, you did mention about creating a game, and you believe that game can significantly change the mortgage industry, especially the way these documents are collected and processed.
I think it's very disruptive. If you think about a mortgage company in a different way, we're not really just doing loans, right? We're a document management company, document evaluation, document collection. I have to get a lot of documents from you as a borrower in order to determine whether you have that ability to pay. I have to get documents from an appraiser and evaluate those to determine if the house is really worth what we're about to lend on it. And so I'm in the documents business. I really am. And those documents can be all digital now. They don't have to be printed out and brought to the branch or the retail office. So I'm in a documents collection game. I'm in a documents evaluation game, analysis, and then ultimately I've got to make a risk decision, an underwrite on all of that. And then I've got to hold on to those documents for 7 years after the last transaction on the loan, which means if I service the loan for you, then that's 37 years on a 30-year mortgage that I have to hold all of that information and be ready to be audited against that data set, right? So as I look at that, I'm going, and the hardest part, a big part of our cost up front is chasing the documents, particularly from the borrowers. And if you've gone through our process, which is a highly regulated process, not a lot of wiggle room for us, you've got to provide substantiation of your ability to pay. I'm going to pull your credit. I am going to ask for your pay stubs. I'm going to ask for your bank statements, right? I'm going to be monitoring all of this stuff as we move forward because I want to make sure that you're not an unsafe risk for me and that I'm not doing something to put you in an uncomfortable position as the borrower. There's several elements of, I've got to have down payment money for my house, not nearly as much as most people think, but I also have to have enough cash on hand at closing. Cash to close is an important phrase that you hear a lot, but then I've got cash to occupy, which is not something you hear a lot. But once I own the house and we've gotten through the closing, I've got to turn on the utilities. I've got to go get everything flowing, power, water. And if I'm moving from an apartment into my first home, I've got to have enough money to furnish that home and get the blinds and the curtains and all of that stuff. Cash to occupy is another part of the mortgage life cycle. So if I blow all of it on my down payment, I may not have enough cash to occupy, right? I may have the house now, but I can't turn on the water, right? That kind of thing, right? So again, you got to look at education. How do I get to an educated borrower, especially a first-time borrower? And the big aha for me was I realized all of these kids are out there playing games like crazy. And many of them are games that are designed to educate. Not all of them, certainly not all of them, but many of them do a really fine job of educating, entertaining, and empowering. And that's really the goal set that we have as we bring our game to life, is just really how do we get into a position where this is sticky enough for you to go through and understand, why do we need your pay stubs? Why do we need your tax returns? Why do we need to pull your credit? And then we've got some mechanisms that we're building in to make that easy for you to understand, and also to power you up for the next challenge in the next part of the game when you actually deposit those documents for us into a locker that is just your financial locker. And then once we get all the way through that, my belief is we'll have somebody that's got a fully loaded locker that can then move straight to an underwriter. Now the mortgage company doesn't have to chase you for the documents. You've already loaded them up into your financial locker, and you just make that available to your loan officer. That's very disruptive, Jay. What I just described takes all of the onus out, the lending side of doing the document checks and all that educational component. We spend a lot of time with mortgage loan officers and assistants and processors trying to educate these borrowers, especially a first-time purchaser, on why we need that stuff. And then, like I said, if you've ever gone out and tried to go find that stuff, man, that's a major ask. That's not a minor ask. And it takes a long time for people to clear their calendars enough to go dig and make that stuff available to the loan officer. Here, we're going to try to make it a seamless part of your education. And then when you finally are really ready to buy, you've already got it all assembled for us, right? We think that's worth a lot of money. And so that's our goal, is to try to disrupt that part. The other thing that's really important to understand is a couple of years ago, during the height of COVID, we had record mortgage transactions going on. We had every lender out there was making money and doing well because there was no shortage of people doing transactions. There was a buying frenzy, frankly, going on during the height of COVID. And now, because of the policies of the Fed primarily in trying to battle back inflation, they've raised the interest rates so dramatically, so quickly, that every time they do that, our market flattens. And we're seeing a very large market shrink to less than half of what it was a couple of years ago. And right now, it's harder than ever to engage with prospects that are really qualified, ready to go. And so, again, our game was an idea about how could we get better qualified prospects in our funnels, and then actually have an educated borrower that we can move through the pipe faster. The average mortgage in America takes about 43 days right now to get from application to close. That's a long time.
Very long time, yeah.
And a lot of that's driven by the regulatory environment itself that says you have to take a lot of time and due diligence in order to really get this risk stuff managed for everybody. But truthfully, if you were really ready to go right now, and I had all of your documentation, I could underwrite your file in less than 4 hours and be ready to close in less than 7 days.
Wow. Oh, wow. Okay. So it's going to be a significant education to the public, because there are so many new first-time buyers. They have no clue what to do. I was the same 15 years back. I said, I want to buy a house. I have no clue what to do. And then I got advice from here and there. It took me almost 2 months, right? From pre-approval letter to actually getting a house and closing it and saying, now I finally got a house. So I hear you. I also know that you are a startup advisor. And I wanted to ask, because that's one question that, and I myself is a startup, so I'm going to benefit significantly from what I'm going to say now. How do you really assess or think, or what indicators do you see that this startup is going to be successful? And what kind of advice you typically give to a startup?
So I look at all of them with that same mindset that says, I want to understand really what problem are you solving? And is it a complete solution or a partial solution? Does your customer need a whole bunch of other things from other companies in order to have a complete solution? Or are you a one-stop shop for them as far as providing a solution that has meaningful pain relief for a real problem that you're having? In a lot of ways, AI is a solution looking for a problem, right? A lot of my startup companies that I'm working with have real solutions for real problems. And then the question is, do they have what it takes to actually bring that all the way into the marketplace and get customers, right? As Drucker said back in the 50s, Peter Drucker, the founding father of the science of management, he said the only reason a business exists is to get a customer and sell to the customer and to keep the customer. Those are the life cycle of a business. If you don't have a customer, you don't have a business.
And nothing.
You may have a great idea, and your ability to execute on a great idea is actually way more important than the quality of the idea. And then ultimately, can you get a customer, keep a customer, and then can you sell more than once to a customer? All right. Because once you have a customer, keeping that customer and continuing to build a relationship over time with that customer, that's real money right there. So that's where I think, as I'm looking at the startups, I look at those kind of things. I look at every business from a framework that I built, and it's actually in my book, Jay. I call the MOAT framework. It's management layer, operations layer, administration layer, and the technology layer. So if you use that acronym MOAT, M-O-A-T, you can very quickly say, okay, I've got the visionary top, the management layer, that's usually the CEO and the board. Do we have the right vision? Are we in touch with reality, or are we living in a fantasy land? And then operationally, can I operationalize that vision? What am I doing to actually bring that vision to life? Over on the administrative side, am I keeping score correctly? And am I making this a winnable game for everybody? Can the executives at the top see that the operators are actually doing that? And am I bringing the right people and the right resources in to the mix as we grow this thing and evolve it in the marketplace? And then underneath all of that is the technology layer that frankly has to replicate each of those functions within itself and provide reserves and resources to each of the other layers. You can look at any company very quickly. And by the way, I do this because as you're trying to make changes to a company, anywhere in the mix, you've got to look at what are the ripple effects anywhere else in the organization, right? How does this affect those executives at the top? How does that affect the operators? How does that affect the administrators? How does it affect the technology layer? And again, you've got to completely look at each of those elements of where this change is going to impact in order to really be successful in making it happen.
Okay, that's a great advice. I have two final questions for you. The first question is, what advice would you give to the rising CXOs?
If I was giving that advice to myself 15 years ago, I think I would have said, Walt, get out of your own way and get into a mindset that is more of a Yoda mindset and less of a Luke Skywalker mindset. And think of yourself more as a guide and a support for others instead of you have to be the hero of your own story. The truth is that the executive layer and really any CXO, anywhere in that C-level, if you're the magic and it's not your team, then there's a bottleneck on what you can get done. If you see that your team is the magic and that they just need a good leader that'll get the most out of them, then that means you've got a good leader that'll put the most into them to get that out. And so it can't be about you. It's got to be about them. That's why I like that framework of Yoda versus Luke Skywalker, right? Yoda was an awesome Jedi warrior in his own right, but the story was never about Yoda.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So then you get into the next round, which is, I think the biggest hurdle of getting out of your own way is, do you really know who you are? Do you really know what you want out of this position? Do you really know what you want to accomplish in this position? Do you really know how that either brings you satisfaction in life, or do you understand yourself? And interestingly, when I was in the Air Force, I found out that we send all of the colonels that are potentially going to make it to brigadier general. As they move from colonel to general, we send them to what we jokingly call charm school. But it turns out charm school was really a deep review of who are you as a leader. How do you respond to situations that are high pressure, high value, low pressure, low value? So you go through a week-long assessment, and at the end of that, the psychologists and the behavioral scientists give you a book on yourself. Because
Wow. Okay.
as you move to that general officer level, the senior executive ranks within the military, what you really need to know is who you are.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And if you're the kind of person that shoots the messenger when they bring you bad news, pretty soon you'll be in an organization where they don't bring you any bad news and they're going to walk you out one day because you didn't tolerate any bad news. Bad news is normal.
Oh,
Bad
yeah.
news is every day. But if you don't tolerate it, you won't get it after a little while. And so you need to know that about yourself because you can make corrections as you go in.
Absolutely.
But if you're already all of that in a bag of chips, then you probably aren't open to those kind of corrections, which means you're going to do harm in the organization, right? Yeah. And I think that self-awareness, that's really what we're saying. Self-awareness is probably the most important attribute for success. And secondarily, a corollary to that is everybody's watching you all the time. They want to see how you're going to respond to whatever's going on. If you're the senior guy in your group or the senior gal in your group, either way, you just need to know everybody's watching how you breathe, how many intakes you take, right? How you roll your eyes or don't roll your eyes, how respectful you are at every level in the organization. They're watching you intently because what you do and how you think has a lot of impact on their life.
Absolutely. Such a great advice. And I do recall when 7 years back, I started this company and one of the advisors and mentors I have, he said what exactly you said. He said, you are going to be on the top. And what is visible of a CEO or of a top leader is all the mistakes, right? So it's absolutely right. I think being self-aware, being able to digest the negative news and making corrections, it's absolutely good. Great advice. I can't thank you enough, Walt, for being on my podcast. Any last words before we close?
Only just to echo what the title of my book was all about. Things are changing. They're going to keep changing. There is no way for you to just hold ground. If you're not willing to change yourself and go with that flow, it can be painful, right? And most of us are not in a place in society where we can just literally go off the grid and pursue the monk lifestyle. So I think the sooner you recognize that we can't stay here and we're going to have to make some changes, get into it and do your best and create value for other people. Create a lot of value if you can. If you're that talented, create a lot of value, right? And have fun doing it. That's the best advice I can give anybody.
Thank you so much. Thank you again for spending time with me on the podcast. It was lovely talking to you. Till next time, have a nice day.
Thank you, Jay. Pleasure being with you.